Hi again, and welcome everyone. Today, I am pleased to present to you the first of our 2022 Women in Leadership Conversation Series. We have an incredible lineup for this series over the next several weeks. Today, though, we are thrilled to have Yvette Vargas joining us, and of course, we're very excited that all of you are joining us as well. For those of you who are new to LHH, LHH is a global talent solutions provider operating not only in the US and Canada, but in more than 60 countries worldwide. We help companies like yours see the possibility in their people. As organizations are transforming their cultures and workforces and preparing for the future of work, we're partnering with them in three ways. To recruit great talent through executive search and professional recruitment, we have specialist consultants across every professional industry and can deliver the right talent with the right skill for now and next. To develop your leaders for today and the future, we partner with you through assessment, individual and team coaching, leadership development programs and journeys, as well as career development solutions. And three, we also support organizations through helping their people develop opportunities either within or outside your organization. Our career transition and mobility services support individuals reinvent themselves for whatever is next for them. By way of introductions, I'm the North American Head of Learning and Development Solutions at LHH, and I'm exceptionally pleased to be your host today. My name is Margot Hoyt. More importantly, a little bit about Yvette Vargas. Yvette's the Executive Vice President, Head of Development at Citizens Bank. She joined the bank about 10 years ago in 2012 and is responsible for defining and leading development strategy tied to talent management, leadership and management development, organizational development, as well as education and training. And Yvette plays a key role in developing and operationalizing citizens' work to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. Central to Yvette's approach, I think we'll all really appreciate this, is her belief that an organization must cultivate the skill, the will, and the environment to really sustain efforts authentically. We're so happy to have you with us today, Yvette.
Good afternoon, Margot. How are you? Thank you for having me. A real honor to be here.
It's just wonderful. By way of a couple of opening comments, Yvette, let me say a few things. One is that advancing women in organizations and achieving equity with men has long been a topic of conversation. Our careers have spanned a few decades together already, but the fact is that we simply need to continue to have the conversation because we have not yet met the objectives. Um, and the ground continues to shift. The last couple of years haven't been easy, and in many studies, we've seen that it's been more challenging for women in the workplace than it has been for men. The ground continues to shift. We're seeing the pandemic hitting us. We're seeing profound changes in how and where we work. We're looking at a number of marginalized communities that we need to focus on. And all of this has an intersection with women. So in the spirit of that conversation, I'm just really excited to have you here today to celebrate many of your successes and to share some of your insights and your inspiration with the viewers who are with us today about individual opportunities and organizational opportunities. So thank you so much for joining us again.
And thank you again. Thank you. It's excited to be here.
We're going to have about 30 minutes where you and I can just answer some questions and have a conversation. And then we're going to open it up to Q&As from the viewers. So if I could just use this as the reminder to all the viewers out there, use your Q&A function to type in your questions, and I'll get to those at the end. And also that this is being recorded, and so shortly after we're finished today, it will be posted up on YouTube if you have to step out or you want to share it with others. All right, all the housekeeping behind us, Yvette. Let's get into things. Let me just start with a couple of really easy questions. The first one, I shouldn't say easy, but open questions. The first one is, here you are, you're an executive vice president in a very well-known bank. Give us a sense of your story. What are some of the milestones or the key turning points that have really made an impact on your career?
I mean, I would be remiss if I didn't start, first of all, really with my background. And maybe I'll start on a more personal level here, which is, I'm a first generation Cuban American, was born in the Bronx. My parents, like many immigrants, came here, to find a better life for their family. And, the thing that I think was so very impactful for me was that my parents, but in particular my mother, was very focused on ensuring that all of her kids, which, by the way, I'm one of four girls. I'm the second one in the birth order. But that we were all focused not just on family, but also on education. And that was really very, very important to my mom. And the fact that we were all girls was also a very important marker in how I have, lived my life, but also my professional life. She made sure that we all taught each other whatever we learned. In fact, when most kids were outside playing after school, we were playing school inside. And her discipline after we came from school was to make sure that each of us taught each other what we had learned in school, and that the mindset around how we were as a community of women is that we would help each other. And I think that over the years expanded not only to my sisters, but then our friends and ultimately my professional colleagues. And so this notion of climbing and lifting, while my mother didn't brand it that way, that is actually what she taught us. And I still, today really live by that. And I try to do it every single day, in a different way. But growing up, as a woman, a young girl of color, as you can imagine, oftentimes I didn't really realize it then, but there was bias in the system. So to give you a story around one particular situation that actually created a marker for me throughout my career was really an incident, in grammar school. I actually didn't learn English until I was 7. I went to a parochial school, and unfortunately, because at the time the teachers were not really all that in touch with, kids who were learning English as a second language, it was perhaps assumed that, when I read in front of the class because I was, slower at my diction or didn't read the books, as quickly as the other students, that perhaps I had a learning disability or that, I needed to be retained back. And that conversation always kind of stayed in the back of my mind because the assumption was that, perhaps I, was not as smart as the other kids. Mm-hmm. And then fast forward right into high school when I was applying for colleges, even though I graduated high school in 3 years, mostly because of my parents' economic environment and their situation financially. There was, coaching, don't apply to Ivy League schools. You're probably not going to get in. Another story that was in the back of my mind, right? Mm-hmm. And then fast forward into my, what I started to think about what I was going to do as a vocation, that always stayed in the back of my mind. Now, having gone through a whole host of, different institutions, all of which were Catholic schools, I went to Catholic grammar school, high school, and college, I really actually had an affinity to participate in religious life. And my original career vocation was really to, be a missionary because I felt that I wanted to be in service, right? And that, this was something that I could be in the background and, be able to prop up people and communities. And so when I went to college, I was probably 16, 17 years old. I started to think about how do I enter the novitiate. And I was a psychology and theology minor. And one of the professors there actually said to me, listen, you're a little too young. You should probably make a more informed decision to go out into the world and think about what you want to do. If you still feel after doing that you want to come back and you still have the calling, then you should enter religious life. So anyway, to make a long story short, we kind of all know I did not take that course, but I did have to work to get myself through college and through graduate school. And so I went into retail, which I actually had a blast. I really liked it. I liked the creative side. I liked the business side. And in fact, I was able to fund my graduate degree by, I was a personal shopper and I styled fashion shows and I really loved the creative side. But it felt a little bit of a departure from my original intention, although there was a service end to it. And so, you know, I somehow, by going through the library, bumped into this notion of industrial organizational psychology. And I said, that's the career I want to pursue. And, you know, over the last 25 years, I'm saying 25 years because that's where I'm going to cut it off, but I've actually been working much longer than that. But, you know, I would say over the last 25, 30 years, I've been, you know, mostly in financial services and certainly the last 20 years in banking. And I would say, you know, as I was going through that experience, there were several lessons that I learned. You know, initially when I started, you know, I've been the beneficiary of amazing bosses, both male and female. The bulk of them have been female, I must admit. And a big part of it is because I've made decisions on where I was going to work based on who I worked for. And I've had, you know, the real blessing of having amazing women that I have worked for. And my first lesson was actually working for the woman who I just actually bumped into not too long ago, and we've started to stay in touch with, but she was a Brown graduate. She was beautiful. She was smart. She was just everything I wanted to be. And, you know, she was grooming me and giving me really nice increases along the way. So I thought, and having come from, you know, the background that I came from, I thought I had arrived. And then, you know, it was the 80s and we hit like a recession and the salaries, you know, kind of started to go down. And instead of talking to her about it, I made the assumption that she had no longer valued me and that, you know, it was time for me to go. So I, without talking to her, looked for another job and jumped. You know, I just like went to another organization, which was wonderful, but I didn't love the job. It wasn't a great experience. In fact, I felt like it held me back. And so that lesson of, there were two things there is don't jump just for money, right? And if you're starting to feel something, you know, talk to your manager about it. Don't make up a story in your head because it will definitely hold you back. And so, you know, as I went into my next careers, what I learned was continue to pick, you know, the people who you work for. And to some extent, the work that you're doing should be building your skills. It should give you the experiences. But the real thing is, don't worry about the title. Don't worry about the job, because all of that will come. Worry about the people that you're working with and for, so they give you the level of mentorship and agency so that you can grow. And in some cases even fail so you can actually accelerate those lessons. And that the peers that you have around you are also very important, right? And as I, you know, matured and certainly got to the place that I am today, you know, I continue to use that as a marker. You know, who am I working for? What am I going to learn from them? You know, and what's the sphere of influence that I have to create the kind of role that I want?
Yeah, so much in there, Yvette. And there's some comments showing up, that inspiring comments remind some of the viewers of their own stories. You know, I go back to the beginning and the strong role that your family has and who you are, and being surrounded by other women, lifting each other up, teaching each other, creating that sense of community that I'm sure is a theme throughout your entire career. Community of women, community of people that you can grow with and lift up together. And I love the idea that you've chosen places to work and people to work with, and often having female leaders. What kind of an impact do you think having female leadership has had on you and your aspirations, than maybe having worked with other men in those organizations?
I mean, and let me be clear, I've worked for men too who have been wonderful and have been wonderful sponsors and mentors as well. but I think, it kind of got baked in with my mom, if I'm honest. And even, my sisters, I have a huge amount of respect for my sisters, in this notion of climb and lift. My older sister and I, we went to good colleges, but we focused on helping my younger sisters. So both of them went to Ivy League schools, and one is a doctor and another one is a educational administrator in California. And my older sister is actually in healthcare. And so, I think having such a strong mom, a strong set of sisters, actually made me gravitate towards women, because that community and that network was so important to me. And I trusted that community, implicitly. And so that, to me, I think has played a big role. I have I've been so lucky, because all of the women that I have worked for have played a role in shaping me on a personal level, because they've been really role models. They've been great mothers, great friends, great partners, great leaders in the organization. And I have followed them, to the organizations that they have been in some cases. So it has played a significant role, and they've allowed me to succeed, and they've allowed me to fail. And all of that has also grown, allowed me to grow. So I'm super grateful for that. The other thing that I have had, and this is a tangential kind of comment, but, I remember in one particular experience, as I mentioned to you, this whole notion of, having gotten feedback early on when I was 7 about, my intelligence and my public speaking. I think one of the things that working with the women that I have had has really forced me to actually reflect for myself on, what are the voices in my head? What are the conditions or the stories that I'm telling myself about who I am? So as I mentioned, this whole thing around public speaking was a big thing for me. And in fact, because I'm an introvert, the combination of that narrative in my head, and kind of the fact that oftentimes I was one woman amongst a group, and certainly one woman of color, even amongst white women, I was always kind of the different one. And then I'm an introvert, and then I had these stories in my head. And oftentimes what I did was I stood back, and while I was doing good work and got good feedback, I tended to, be the kind of the whisperer. I kind of shared the work with other people, let them present it, because I wasn't 100% comfortable in doing that kind of work. And, it didn't bother me, but over time, I started to feel invisible and started to even feel resentful. And the good news is that I had, managers, female managers, who gave me resources to try to unpack that. And so I got a coach, an executive coach, which I always really appreciate. And if you all can get one, then do that, because it's a powerful, powerful resource. And what I learned from this coach, who, by the way, was a man, I wanted someone who would tell me the truth about what they saw and what they observed and what they heard from others. And what I got from that was that, it wasn't really anything that anybody was doing. I was doing it to myself, right? I made a decision to kind of hang back and to whisper in other people's ears and to be okay with it. And you know what, if I'm honest with you, I'm still okay with it. That's still something that somehow is fundamentally who I am. But today I pick and choose where I'm going to have a strong voice. I make a decision, that this is where I want to show up. I'm intentional. In fact, one of the pieces of feedback that I got from one of my, mentors, who are female, it's like, be intentional every single day. Think about the meetings, think about your relationships. How do you want to show up? And everything you say, everything you do, the ways in which you engage people should reflect that intention. And so, that is a very long way, Margot, of saying that these women, all of them, and I've had, half a dozen, but in particular 3 who were significant players in shaping, and I give them a lot of credit for that. I did a lot of hard work on myself, but they gave me the space the agency to kind of become who I wanted to become.
Yeah, there was a comment that, not everybody has those kinds of role models or those kinds of mentors in their lives. Not everybody has the same kind of family support that you have. So, for us who are mature, who've been around and are in a position where we can provide that kind of mentorship, that kind of guidance, parenting. You don't have to be a woman, you could be a man, as you've noted as well, to really encourage others is so, so important in helping to create the path. The hard work was still yours, Yvette. There's no doubt about that. But it takes some luck. It takes some other support around an individual to be successful, and that really rings true here as well. Yeah, interesting. Now we're seeing an increase right now, Yvette, of women leaving organizations. For a variety of different reasons, pandemic, ways of work, economic. And this has significant impact, not only on individuals' careers, but also on diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies for organizations and the diversity of thinking that we look for as, behind all of that. You spoke to me about using design thinking in your own career and that could help other women in the workforce. Tell me a bit more about what you mean by that and how you've applied it to your career.
Yeah. So first of all, I think that, when people are starting to consider, moving for whatever it is, whether, and in particular over the course of the last 2 years, there's different reasons why people leave: more money, misalignment with purpose, lack of opportunities, what the case might be. Just before you jump, I would just say a couple of things. Make sure that you've done everything you can to ascertain what you want, right? Because oftentimes we believe that we've told people and the story still remains in our head. We've had the conversations in our head. We've been subtle about things, but we actually never ask for what we want. So a big part of the story that I would say is, sometimes you don't have to move. Sometimes you can stay in the role that you're in, but reimagine it and redesign it. And so, this is kind of tricky, right? Because you have to be in an environment where you feel that you can do this. But I've certainly applied this in my opportunities, and it might be linked to the people who I work for or my managers or even the environment that I'm in. But I have used it a couple of times where right now I can tell you I've been in my role 10 years, and every year my job changes because I ask for responsibility for a particular area, or I do some work and using design thinking techniques. Like I start to do a little bit of research, right? What are the real pain points that I can actually address, or friction points for the people that I serve, right? What are the trends externally? What is it that I can imagine? Or what are some ideas that would be able to solve it? And I do kind of sky's the limit. And then I start to, package solutions and strategies, and then reflect them back to my managers and or partners to see, is this something that I can do? And you'd be surprised, right? Maybe you're not going to get everything you want, but you can get some of it, and it starts to re-energize you. I think some of the burnout or lack of interest or apathy or disengagement that people actually feel sometimes is because they're bored, right?
Yeah.
Or they're burnt out because of so much stress. You start to feel disillusioned because the work that you're doing isn't having the impact that you want it to have. So then, before you jump, is there a way to reframe and reimagine? And, these are all techniques that companies are using to reimagine the products and services of your customers. So why not use some of the same techniques to open up the thinking, right, around your specific role? Now, maybe you don't have an organization that would allow that, or an environment that would allow it. Then, the next piece that I would say is then really think about your life, right? And before you go from one situation to the other, make sure that you have really reflect on what is your vision for your life, right? And answer the question, what do I need to become in order to actually achieve that? And then once you have identified that, then what are the resources that I have today to help me get there? And what do I still need to get there? And I think, if you can go through that process, and by the way, this is the same kind of process a company would go through if they were transforming themselves. But, be intentional about it, use every opportunity to get clarity around your life and who you want to become. And perhaps, by the way, your vision, your career is only one aspect of who you want to become. So look at yourself holistically before you do anything, and make sure that the kind of the action plans and the development plans you put in place allow you to be a complete person, not just focus on your career, because you can't separate yourself. And I learned that early on, right? I used to kind of hold back, this is my career and everything else is behind the scenes. And in fact, we've seen that in the last 2 years, that's not how we operate, right? We're complete whole people. Envision your life in a holistic way, and then align the time, be intentional about the time that you spend on actually activating the plan. Because at the end of the day, the amount of time that you spend on something is actually a manifestation of what you value.
Right. Those words, what intentionality really coming through there, and that ability to self-reflect and really understand what you value and what's important to you, Yvette. Is that something that came naturally to you? Did you have to learn that? Because I think there's certainly a large group of people that kind of go with the waves, and as opportunities present, they take those. This approach seems so thoughtful and so strategic, really, as you said, and very much mirroring a strategic planning exercise for an organization.
I think I was always very intentional, about my career.
Okay.
I wasn't always intentional about my life. And I'll tell you one little story. It's not so little because unfortunately it was a little dramatic, but around 3.5 years ago, there was a series of events that happens in my life. My son, who lived in California, he's now 30, had, a medical event where he had a brain aneurysm. Pretty much his brain exploded. And I was here, he was in California. Anyway, had to go over there. That led him to have a heart attack. He flatlined. They brought him back to life, but said, listen, if he recovers from this, he won't be the same person, right? So essentially, as a parent, what do you pray for, right? So that was a huge stressor for me. To make a very long story short, as I said, he's 30 years old, he's healthy, miraculous things happen. That's a different podcast, okay? But miraculous things happen, and he's alive and healthy and happy. But shortly after that, I lost a sister. Months after that, a very young friend of mine who committed suicide in a very dramatic way. 2 months after that, my mom died, and 2 months and 18 months and 12 months after that, my dad died. So I had, in between all of that, a huge amount of trauma. I had already been gaining a lot of weight and had chronic asthma, and I was not taking care of myself. I was, living a crazy life. After all of these incidents, I went back to work, my choice, by the way, because I felt I was strong and I could do this. And I wasn't paying attention to what was happening to my body. I wasn't paying attention to my mental health, because my vision of myself was that, I can get through everything, right? I can do this. And then one day, it was the holidays. I'd taken some time off. My manager calls me and said, listen, you have to facilitate a meeting in Boston amongst our executive committee. Could you come down? I was overweight. It was like 2 degrees in Boston. I was walking up a hill, had an asthma attack, almost died. I had to pray and meditate through it. And it was only, and I always tell this story, and I always credit my boss, because if it had not been for her, I don't even know I'd be talking to you here. But that incident changed my life, right? And it forced me to be intentional about my health, my mental health, my physical self. So what did I do? I took a 5-month leave. I lost 100 pounds. I sold my house. I, reset and reimagined my job. I, let go of the things that no longer serve me. Like I didn't have to do it all. I didn't have to do it all. There was a whole lot of people, and it didn't devalue the value that I had, that I was bringing to my family, because I wanted to be alive for my son. I wanted to be alive for my family. I wanted to have joy in my life. So I have become intentional about what I'm grateful for, intentional about what brings me joy. And so if it doesn't bring me joy, I don't do it. I simply don't do it, and I'm grateful even for the hard times, right? So this notion of gratitude has really kind of changed how I think about it. And again, it's very intentional. I wake up every morning. That's the first thing I do. I think about my day. I think about how I want to be. And I think about all the things that I'm grateful for and the people that I'm grateful for. So it's hard. It requires a lot of discipline. I'm not good at it every day. I don't wake up every day wanting to do it, but I force myself to do it every day.
Just an amazing story of resilience and transformation, Yvette. Thank you for sharing that. You probably can't see all the chats. I'm by catching some of them that are just so grateful for what you're sharing. Too much for any individual to have to go through, and to have to be able to pull everything together and come out the other side of this as confident and as pulled together as you have. That it's just an amazing and inspirational story for all of us. Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing. That we could do 4 hours on the stories that Yvette brings to us today. I do want to get a chance, Yvette, to talk to you a little bit about, and it feels like an abrupt shift here, but there's so much in your job, and as you said, you've redesigned it and focused it on things that are important to you and are important for the organization right now. Are there strategies or initiatives that you're particularly proud of that are having an impact for women in your organization today?
Yeah. So I think that, this whole notion of helping other women requires a whole ecosystem of initiatives, right? There's no one thing, because as you know, we're battling bias, where it's we talked about able to, want to, allowed to, right? Kind of the skill, the will, and the environment. And that is a whole ecosystem that you have to address. And so for citizens, what I am proud of is the commitment that this organization has to being a real trusted and active advocate for diverse and inclusive workplace as well as a society. And so there have been a whole host of things that we have put in place, and I'll just name a few with really good results, right? From a hiring point of view, we've put in some of what will feel like traditional things, but it is the combination of all those things that creates the movement, right? So having a diverse hiring commitment, where we have to have 50% diverse slate, and 50% have to be interviewed. And last year, as an example, we had like 700 roles. Of the 700 roles, little over 45% of those roles were filled by women. So, I think that's one of the things. We have a scorecard, a diversity scorecard, where we're measuring the pipeline of women and people of color, and we put targets. And this is our second year in that effort. So it's been kind of a pilot. We're still learning on it, but we've already seen some movement in terms of our internal mobility. 62% of our roles have been filled internally, or I should say 62% of our open roles have been filled by women. And that's a 4% increase from last year. So we're making progress at every level of the organization. And then we put in partnerships, for example, with Financial Women's Association, to bring women back who have, off-ramped, and now they're coming back. And so we're investing in them. And specifically, we're doing this in our wealth business. We have other partnerships like Hey Mama, who, their membership base is really a group of mothers who are trying to come back into the workplace, and they're trying to grow their families and their careers, right? So we're partnerships with them. And so there's a whole host of other organizations like Girls Who Code, Black Girls Who Code, because I think even the women of color, that's a separate story, right, within the women's story, right? And, you know, if you look at the McKinsey study as an example, you see that there's still a hierarchy, right? White men, then white women, then men of color, then women of color. And so I think we're putting a whole host of programming. But what I will call out that in our business services area and between our, you know, head of technology and the woman who is the head of business services, we put in a program called Progressing Our Women, and they were a series of mentoring circles where they helped each other. They got professional development. And I think, you know, we've seen real progress. 93% of the women, there were 3 cohorts, 93% of those women are still with the organization. It's been a real retention tool. Their levels of engagement, we've seen progression. A quarter of them have changed roles, a quarter of them have changed titles, you know, so there's been movement by simply having these cohorts. And then our BRGs, right? Our BRGs, which are our business resource groups, our WIN network has really been an instrumental source of inspiration, of skill building, of community building, and of volunteerism, you know, which I think is so important to the community of women here at Citizens. It's actually a real value for us as an organization, and they have brought that to life. And I think the combination of all of those things, I think, are showing that we're making progress. We also measure sentiment and their levels of engagement and whether there's differences between groups. And what we see as a general matter, there's very little difference as we move through the organization. There are some differences business by business and levels by levels, but as a general matter, the experience of our culture feels the same to women as it does to men.
Amazing. Amazing. And it's interesting there, again, this theme of bringing the community. You're not trying to do this all internally and on your own, but bringing communities, many communities of other women together to make a success story. And of course, the portfolio approach, it's not just one thing. So often we hear what's the magic bullet? What's the one thing we need to focus on? I guess that would be to create a wonderful portfolio of initiatives and strategies to really move the needle, right? I want to get to the Q&A here shortly. So one final question before we do that. I know that you're a mentor and a coach to many women. When you think about the key messages in 2022, what are those messages for women that you have today, the key advice?
You know, I would say this is a time where, you know, it's all about the skills that you have, right? And the value that you can create. So, you know, in this environment, you know, spend time being intentional about the skills that you want to add to your portfolio, and take chances with opportunities. You know, don't worry about the word failure, right? It's all lessons learned, and take chances, be bold with yourself, invest in yourself. And, you know, as I've said, you know, if you don't make time for it, it's not going to happen. So make time to go do your learning, put it on your calendar whenever it makes sense for you. Do it every week, learn something, do something hard every week. The networking is so important. I know being in hybrid or remote environments makes it a little challenging, but again, make a list every single week. You know, for example, you know, I use a system called Full Focus, and this is not a plug for them, but it just works for me. And I still, even though I have every digital device, I write it down. Like, who are the people I want to talk to today? What is the master class that I'm taking? I actually have a personal platform that I go to for meditation, for master classes, you know, and they range a whole host of things. And obviously I do the learning that we do in our own platform. You know, I try to do the learning that we have in our own platform. So I think scheduling learning and building your skills is important. And then I think the last thing that I would say is, don't, take chances laterally as well. Oftentimes we're all kind of like trying to, get the bigger title or get the big increase. And, you all have to know what is important to you, what you value at that moment in time. But, there's nothing like the accumulation. It's a portfolio of your investment, increase that portfolio with a diverse set of relevant and emerging skills, because you have to be 2 steps ahead, because everything is changing so fast. The workplace is changing, the jobs are changing, they're morphing into new things. And, as women, I think we need to ensure that we're reimagining ourselves as leaders in the organization. So we're influencing. So it's not just the business stuff, but the human centric stuff, right? And how do you inspire and how do you mobilize? And that takes skill and it takes practice, and you have to invest in it.
I love just the comment around if it's going to be important to you, if you value it for yourself, for your career, schedule it. Make a way of making sure you get it done. And there's just some good discipline and rigor around that, and putting yourself forward. Okay, there's a lot of questions and comments in the comment sections. I'm using the Q&A for the Q&A forum as much as possible. So if you have a question, try and get it in there. I'm looking back to one of the questions in the Q&A, and it says, Yvette, have you ever walked away from a job even without another one to jump to because you had difficulty with a particular boss? If so, how did you explain that decision when interviewing with potential employers?
I've never walked away from a job because I had a bad situation with a manager or boss. That I haven't encountered that. If I'm honest with you, I did consider walking away when I had all of that trauma in my life. I did consider that. And because I did not feel emotionally or mentally fit to be in that job in the way in which I was at that moment in time. And I think, I would ask you to do your own analysis of, can you do that? Can you financially do it? Can you emotionally do it? Does that provide a different level of stress? Does that free you up to discover who you are and discover what you need? And if you answer those questions with clarity and conviction, then you should do what's right for you. And I would not let fear stop you. You just need clarity and real conviction and a plan, right? Of action. So that's a hard question, but I think you have to go through a little bit of your own discovery to answer that question for yourself. But that's as close to that kind of situation that I've gotten.
There's a real sense of you better do that intentionally, not just on a whim at the end of the frustrating day, right? But with a plan and with a way of going forward. Great. There's a question here. What advice would you give to mothers of young children who are trying to balance their role as mother, wife, and professional life and advancement?
So I struggled with that. My son is 30 and I still have conversations, have I damaged him? Was I a good mother? I still ask him those questions, and listen, I think we have to stop shaming ourselves and feeling guilty for trying to do the things that bring us joy, being a mother, being a wife or a partner, or, having a great career. What the answer for me was that there were times that I wasn't going to get it right in one of those areas. Something was going to suffer, and I could have it all at 100%, but it wasn't going to be 100% all the time. And so I had to give myself permission. And there were days that I, missed soccer or was home late, didn't feed him, didn't see him for 2 days. I was on the road. And, but then when I was there, I was super present. right? And there were times that I wasn't great at work. I, was in a bad mood. Maybe I wasn't a great leader that day. Maybe I didn't have a good presentation that day. Forgive yourself and move on, right? But, make your plan, do all you can do. Like there's a little commercial on Instagram that says, just do your best. I'm doing my best. That's all I can do. And, if your heart's in the right place, you'll do the right thing.
Yeah, I remember hearing one woman just say that the mindset with her children became so important, and the stories that she came home with couldn't be about how much she hated work or the stress of work or, mommy's upset. It had to be about, I love my work and this is what I learned today and this is who I helped today and this is what brings me joy about my work, so that it was something that, her children, she felt, could be proud of her and understood why she spent as much time as she might have away from the family, over periods of time, which I love that as well, right?
Love that.
Yeah,
I
you got
love
to be
that.
able to have those different. So someone I noticed I don't know if it's the same person, but somebody in the comments saying this is great because their theme right now is to be bold. And then there's a question in here about, can you share a moment when you took a chance or you felt you were especially bold in the move you made or what you asked for? What was the result?
So I think this was bold in my definition. But there, I worked in another financial institution, and I wanted to implement a whole reorganization. And by the way, I'm not advocating that everybody does this. I took a big risk and it was okay. So, this is my story. I don't know that this is the way to go everywhere else, but I had a vision about how I wanted to redefine, my department. And I decided that I wasn't going to make a big deal about it. I was just going to go ahead and start implementing it in small ways. Right. And it went from, being a traditional department to kind of at an enterprise level, creating this internal consulting team. And, I had a vision for it. I did a lot of training with the team. We had offsites. We had a really good time. It was about learning and distributing, services to the rest of the organization. And I didn't make an announcement. I changed the name of the department and kind of subtly put it out there. And all of a sudden, because people were so energized and I had a great team of leaders, they're super smart, PhDs, in some cases, management consultant background. They were all super smart and they just made it happen. And over a period of time, it started to kind of catch on and other people wanted to do similar things. And sometimes you just have to make change happen quietly, and then by the time it's done, people didn't even realize that it was kind of done. And I remember my manager at the time said, you took a real risk there. It paid off, but you took and I always remember that. And there are times that I want to replicate it. And then if I'm honest with you, I'll say, you know what, don't push your luck, you let it happen one time. But I thought that was one of the bolder moves that from a structural process point of view that I've done. For the most part, I'm always thinking about change management and how to communicate and how to implement change. But that was probably a little off the grid, in a pretty large scale organization. So I did take a big risk.
There was no asking for permission there. It was just gradually making it happen, and exactly. You knew it was going to work. I love it. I love it. Somebody's asking, will this recording be accessible to rewatch? Yes, it will on YouTube. What is your advice to retired women with high energy and talent? How do you also earn money retired?
Listen, I think the new thing here is side hustles, and I think that, if you're interested in doing things and you're retired, send me a note, because we actually have we're looking at how do we engage the full workforce. I know that, in my mind, when I imagine the future, I think I'm going to have a lot more juice, and I don't want to just go to the beach, right? And so I think that the process of reimagining yourself, I think if you don't have a coach, you might want to take a life coach and say, okay, how do I reimagine this next segment of your life? And by the way, for those women who are on that cusp, you should be planning for your retirement. You should think about what you want to do. And then everything at the back half of your corporate life or whatever life you have at the moment should be in service to preparing you for that second half of your life, right? And so I actually think there's another thing to plan, like know when you want to retire, so you're planning for it and it doesn't bump into you and you find yourself like, I've been busy, all this work has given me joy and given me juice, and this is where I gotta get my recognition and my value from, and then all of a sudden I don't have it. So plan for your retirement, not just from a career point of view and financial point of view, but like, what are you really going to do? And how do you continue to add value to the community or the industry that you're in, if that's what you choose to do?
Yeah, there's so much wisdom, insight, energy that is still to give, right? How would you handle a situation where others take credit for your work and you are looked over for being quiet? Tapping into the introvert of days gone by, Yvette.
Yep. Now listen, that happens today, right? I think that it's very contextual, right? Because it matters, whether there's a blatant kind of, they take your job or they refer to it and therefore they get credit for it. There's like a continuum of how that shows. But I would say when you're doing work, again, be thoughtful about sharing, right? You can share. If your personality is not that you're humble or you don't like to be assertive and saying, this is what I did. But I think you have to learn to do that, to say, when so-and-so and I, worked on this, or when I worked on this and shared it with Mary, as you're hearing from Mary, when she and I worked on it, or when I worked on it, whatever the positioning is, but I think you should find places where you start to show your work, speak to your work. I definitely whisper in a lot of people's ears and, do work on behalf of it. And that brings me joy. But I think because I know the information so well, right? If it's your ideas and your thinking and how you originated the narrative in there, you should be the person delivering it. So you should make sure that you create opportunities where you're talking about that work, and let other people can talk about it, but you talk about it. Find opportunities for you to showcase the work and show how much you know about it, right? Because if you thought about it, it's really your work, you're going to talk about it in ways that other people can't, right? And no matter where you go, they can't take that away from you. So find and architect opportunities to showcase it, to be the spokesperson and to support the person who's talking about it. Let me add to it. Let me add to the narrative, and let me tell you what the thinking was when we started doing this work, right? Share the platform. It's fine.
Yeah, it's such a skill. It is a skill, and it's a mindset that I think a lot of women do struggle with, is finding the right words, the right tone, the right way to speak up and advocate for what they've done and their perspective, right? So that they don't let other people tell their story for them, right?
Right.
Yeah, it really is so important. Absolutely. Thanks for the question, anonymous attendee. Great women in leadership like you have paved the way for the next generation of powerful leaders. The way has been paved, but still holds a lot of obstacles. What advice do you have for us as we are trying to follow the steps, but are still fighting for a voice and a chair at the table and still wanting to pave the way for the next generation?
Look, I think there's power in numbers, and I do think we all have an obligation, to kind of climb and lift, right? And so I think if we could be watching out for each other, I know that, oftentimes it feels like there's only one seed and everybody's kind of trying to, fight for the seed and compare. But I think, my advice is, and it's unfortunately not that of sophisticated advice, which is, let's just watch out for each other, right? The last 2 years, I think people are burning out, super stressful. Everything triggers them. Sometimes we don't show up well. Sometimes we're not prepared, and I think, just simple acts of kindness, how can I help you? Listen, what happened here? Is there something I can do to help you prepare? Or, here's some observations I had. Is that helpful? Would you like me to help you? I think we have to extend ourselves a little bit to each other, and to be kind to each other. And when somebody, gets ahead of you, right, they get a promotion, that you celebrate them sincerely, right? I'm definitely a believer that, the universe, kind of karma comes back, right? And I think, I know I do meditations, and when I meditate and when I pray for everybody. I want everybody to be happy. I want everybody to be joyful. I want everybody to be successful. And so I think it's a mindset that we have to start kind of really internalizing to help each other actively, right? Not passively. And if we have a gripe with another woman, handle it. Handle the gripe. We don't always like each other. That's human behavior. But, let's not give people reasons to believe that we can't act as leaders, that we can't show up as a community. And I think when you have the numbers, you'll make progress.
Wonderful. We're coming up on the very end here, Yvette. I just want to say thank you and give you an opportunity for any other final comments or words of wisdom for all the viewers that are here. The comments are blowing up with all sorts of thank yous and appreciations, and I think there are people looking for coaches, etc. But what would you like to leave as your final word for our viewers today?
Listen, when you think about your life, imagine it big, imagine it with all your mind, believe it in your heart, and do everything you do to achieve it with all your might. And if you do that, I think you'll have happy, healthy lives.
Oh, that's wonderful. There's absolutely no question in my mind why you are as successful as you are, Yvette. I want to thank you so much. You're generous with your insight, with your time, with your experiences and your personal stories. Truly an inspiration, and it's been a delight to have you with us today. Thanks again for joining.
Thank you. Thanks.
And for everybody, try to get to as many of your questions as possible. I'm sure that we'll continue to answer some of these questions with some of our future conversations as well. So tune in next week when we're talking with Tammy Hierman. She's the author of a book called Reframe Your Story, and focuses on women's and advancing women's careers as well. So we're looking forward to that conversation. But Yvette, thank you again. Thank you everyone for joining us, and have a wonderful, wonderful day. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.